Welcome into ESPN FC. Shaka Hislop and Stevie Nicol alongside myself, Kay Murray here. We're also inviting in Shaka Hislop because given Newcastle's resurgence in the Premier League, we wanted to take this opportunity to step back in time and talk about the 95-96 season when they just fell short of winning the Premier League title. Now, ahead of the season, a lot of money was spent, millions invested. Sir John Hall's money coming in. One of those was a young goalkeeper, one of those players.
Who would that be?
That was a man called Shaka Hislop. Shaka, it was a special time back then. Tell us what it was like to be brought to Newcastle at that time.
It was incredible. Remember, about midway through the previous season, Newcastle sold Andy Cole and Kevin Keegan had to stand at the steps outside the offices of St James's Park and defend that decision, promise the fans that he would be investing in the team, he would be using that money to invest in the team. So that summer he brought in Les Ferdinand, David Ginola, Warren Barton, and I was the final piece to that puzzle, joining in August. In putting together a team that he felt could have a run at the title. And we came close. It was an exciting time that I don't think Newcastle had seen before, and I still don't think they've seen since.
Did you know from the beginning that this was a team that were going to challenge for the title? Was that feeling there?
Well, we felt we had a good team. You're never quite sure. You're never quite sure how good you are until the season starts, until you really get going. And I remember our first home game of the season, I believe it was Coventry, we won 3-0, and just the ease with which we blew by Coventry. And then at home, first game of the season, and the way the fans reacted, you realised St James's Park was a cauldron like no other in the Premier League. And all of a sudden, we felt on the just back of that 190 minutes and how convincing we were that we were on the cusp of something special.
It's interesting when you hear that Shaka had come in that summer, David Ginola, Les Ferdinand as well. What do you remember of that team, that season, Stevie?
To be honest, I remember playing against a side like that. It reminded me of playing against Manchester United at the best. And by that, what I mean is, it feels as though they have more players than you. You know, they play at such a tempo, and it seems to be they've got more players on the field because they just, you know, overlaps, you name it, combination play. And the atmosphere itself, for an away player to go into an atmosphere like that, is actually enjoyable. Unfortunately, when the game starts, it's not quite as enjoyable because as much as we enjoy playing in it, you talk about getting the adrenaline going in the opposition and for a Newcastle player. So when I'm talking about they're moving the ball fast, or they're running fast, or they're doing everything at an incredible pace because the adrenaline is going through them for fun with the noise of the crowd. And so to play against it, I mean, it's kind of choose your poison. And as Shaka said, when you're playing against players like, I mean, Les Ferdinand, for example, at his best, how do you mark him? Yeah. You can't even kick him because you just bounced off him. You know, they just had quality everywhere. David Ginola. Imagine having Ginola on the wide areas, setting you up if you're Les Ferdinand. And at the back, they were strong, not just with Shaka, you know, Steve Howe. You go through the team, and even their so-called water carriers were fantastic. You know, Rob Lee. Rob Lee is a player anybody would want on their side. Not a star, doesn't play sparkling football, but I'll tell you what, when it comes to closing the ball down, when it comes to winning the ball back, when it comes to just starting things off, I mean, so they had such an array of weapons, pace, height, strength, and as I said, even the guy who's supposed to be just not an ordinary player, that seems a little harsh, but even he was great.
Just down the A19, there was a young striker called Shaka Hislop playing with Middlesbrough. Which players do you remember of this Newcastle side back at the time, Jan?
Well, first of all, I think the boys described them very well, the team. But I think it's important to understand the Northeast, the football with Borough, with Sunderland, with Newcastle, all that passion relationship to football. And when you go to Newcastle, I was there last week and I brought some colleagues of mine for the first time going to Newcastle. That is a football city. I may say that even as a former Borough man. That is unbelievable. You come into a stadium and 9 of 10 will have that black and white shirt. There is an atmosphere unbelievable. Did I love to go there as a opposition? No, of course not, because I was in a neighbour Borough. We wanted to be there. We were on a way up. But that team, as they were saying, they had all kind of skills in that team. When Ginola came 1 against 1, I remember a game Borough played there, and Neil Cox, I mean, he's a great guy, but I remember Ginola was dancing around him all the time, and after 70 minutes he kicked him down, and Coxie went over to him and said sorry, and I went over to Coxie, don't say sorry to him, kick him all the time, that's the only way we can stop him. was a fantastic team, and when we had a look there, and it was not only was they fantastic in terms of result, they were so entertaining. There was an entertaining team to watch. And unfortunately, sometimes also to play against them, you just felt, wow, this is a very good team.
Because that was a big part of it, wasn't it? That Keegan didn't want to betray his principles, which was why we saw this swashbuckling side, and why we saw one of the best games ever in the Premier League, that 4-3 against Liverpool, was actually voted the best game of the Premier League in the first decade of the PL. Shaka, what do you remember of it?
I was on the bench for that one. Pavel Siniček started. And we go to Anfield, and things are starting to come a little bit unstuck. Manchester United are closing the gap. And you speak about Keegan not wanting to forego his principles. To that point, very early in the season, just after I joined Newcastle, Keegan says to me, we're going to attack. We're not going to keep many clean sheets, but I just want you to get your mind around that. We're an attacking team. That's how I play the game. And we're not going to compromise on that. I'm fine with it. I'm like, okay, that's how we play, and that's how we're playing. And there aren't many teams who would go to Anfield and play open. There weren't many teams there, and there aren't many teams now that would just go and attack Liverpool at Anfield in the way that we did. And it felt... that game just kind of swung so many different ways as goals were going in, as the emotions were pumping up, and we can sing the praises of the St. James's Park crowd. Anfield is little different. Anfield is a fantastic place to play a football, and they responded. The Anfield fans made their presence known, and that added to the atmosphere of the game. And then the very late goal just kind of crushed us in terms of spirit, given that game and the end-to-end nature of it. But then also because we knew that Manchester United were breathing so closely behind the necks.
He brought in a centre-back called George Alberts. I remember the goal. He chipped a goalkeeper against Manchester United.
Philippe Alberts.
Sorry, I'm thinking the Rangers guy, George Albert. Philippe Alberts, the centre-back, to Shaka's point about him wanting to attack, arguably the goal of the season, chipping Schmeichel from 35 yards. Nobody does that. Not a centre-back. That's the kind of team that Newcastle had, where the centre-back is chipping the goalie from 35 yards.
So how did they give up the 12-point lead and ultimately lose the title?
We, because of that same swashbuckling style and catching up with us in the second half of the season, particularly on the road, we were absolutely fantastic at St. James's Park. In our 19 games, we lost 1-0 to Manchester United, and we drew with Spurs on the final day of the season. But in our last 8 games on the road in the Premier League, we picked up 6 points. And that ultimately cost us. You can't be that open, that swashbuckling on the road, that consistently. That is what caught up with us. That and the game that I mentioned at St. James's Park. Cantona scored the 1 goal. But every time I think about that game, every time I talk about that game, that was easily the best goalkeeping performance I'd seen from Peter Schmeichel with my own 2 eyes. Peter Schmeichel won Manchester United the title in 95-96.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that you see as well. That it was big results for Newcastle and some quite fine margin results for Manchester United that season as well. But it's a season never to forget for Newcastle, the 95-96 one. There's a lot more talk like this every single night on our ESPN FC show. Be sure to check your local listings to keep up.
Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPN FC 7 days a week. Subscribe to ESPN+.